Recently I found myself in Western Europe with quite a task. With several countries to traverse, friends to check in on, and a big family reunion to attend, taking a fast train was the easy answer. But as we all know, a road trip is so much more interesting. The Germany, Switzerland, Italy, France ring promises a true driving culture with great roads set against spectacular landscapes. This was 3,000 kilometers round trip, so we needed something comfortable, but not an SUV, because when in Europe, you do as the Europeans do. That meant a station wagon. Like, for example, a BMW 5 Series Touring in Euro-spec metallic brown. That's a car BMW are imminently bringing down to Australia despite our addiction to SUVs, so this seemed like an ideal opportunity to test the theory that wagons still do everything better. Doing the BMW thing in Europe meant finding our way to Munich, which is full of great classical architecture, along with equally enormous beer and pretzels. This was my first time in Bavaria and well timed to align with Oktoberfest, although forgetting my lederhosen wasn't particularly bright. The 5 Series is made about 100 kilometers north of here, but BMW's headquarters is much closer to town, and after collecting our Atlas Cedar 530i luxury line from one of many prep centres surrounding Munich, we headed back to BMW's famed cylinder building.
I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and for a long time, me and a lot of other car journalists have said that Australian families really don't need SUVs, and that in many ways, the humble station wagon does a better job of day-to-day family transport and road trips. So, what do you do when you have to drive from Munich through northern Italy into France and then all the way back again? Well, you borrow the new BMW 5 Series Touring in order to see whether a car like this 530i really does do a better job than an X5 or another lifestyle SUV. So, let's jump in and see how we go.
An obligatory shoot at HQ and other assorted formalities out of the way, our tight schedule meant we had to get on the road immediately. And in a baptism of fire, that road was the unrestricted 95 Autobahn that runs almost due south to the Austrian border. Extremely light traffic meant this was a good chance to get acquainted with the 530i's high-speed stability, and for a big wagon, getting to the 250 km/h limiter was easy and almost eerily calm. Our destination for the day was the very northern tip of Italy to drive one of the world's great roads, the Stelvio Pass. While this incredible winding stretch of alpine road is barely more than 200 kilometers from Munich, the rugged terrain means you meander for about 4 hours past picture-perfect Edelweiss fields and Tyrol villages. Aside from the hard Swiss border, where we were quizzed on the flora found in our Australian passports, driving through Europe is calm and easy, blending from one EU country to the next, with just a road sign differentiating a change in nation. As you approach the foot of the Eastern Alps, there are a number of quaint towns near the stunning Lago di Resia in which to grab lunch. In this part of the world, bilinguality is utterly common, Italian and German that is, with signs directing to both the Passo dello Stelvio and the Stilsiok, which are one and the same road. An extremely fortunate wrong turn saw us take a precarious but unbelievably beautiful back way to the Stelvio Pass. The Umbrail Pass sits in Switzerland's southern extremity, ascending rapidly until it meets the Italian border at a snowy 8,000 feet. Despite the snow, it was unseasonably warm with dry roads, meaning this rear drive 5 Series was utterly secure. Travelling on a weekday meant we were isolated most of the time, making for ideal opportunities to capture the 5 Touring, which had earned the nickname of the Dad Wagon, against unreal alpine backdrops with no visual clutter. Instagrams captured, it was time to make the final ascent to the village that straddles both sides of the Stelvio Pass, which is a manna from heaven for fans of driving, cycling, and riding motorbikes. While bicyclists dominate here, all come together with respect for wheeled activities in all their forms, eating and regrouping before tackling the most famous side of the pass, which I was very excited to see for the first time. For any car guy, the first experience on the Stelvio is a huge moment. That's what this shot was all about. Here I am with my mate Nick, having my first look over the sheer drop into the twisting abyss below. What a road. Sure, doing it in something like this might have been a little more appropriate than a family wagon, but like any BMW, the 5 Series Touring knows how to tango and proves surprisingly agile and smile-inducing on the way down and on the way back up, because you can't just do the Stelvio once if you've come this far across the world. This has to be one of the best sights to see on a navigation screen in the world, but arguably it's the western side of the pass, descending towards the Italian town of Bormio, that has the most picturesque afternoon views. There are numerous dugouts in which to park up, soak up the scenery and take a break. Here's me actually filming that shot. And like our cyclist friends coasting downhill, we were pretty exhausted from a big day. But with no rest for the wicked, it was on to a pit stop in Lake Como, which did not disappoint. Aside from the hilarity of locals punting their Lancias at 80 km per hour around blind corners, Como is beautiful, relaxing and warm even in the late shoulder season. If you're in the area, it's a must-do, particularly the village of Lallio, where the BMW is parked up for a couple of days. Lallio is central enough and close to Cernobbio without the masses of tourists, but really, you can't go wrong anywhere around this picturesque body of water. From Como, it was back into the mountains to the ski hub of Chamonix. The snow season doesn't open for another couple of months, but Chamonix was abuzz with adventure sports fans and trail walkers, and it marked the start of a culture of French breakfasts of pastries and enormous hot chocolates. Mont Blanc ticked off, our final stretch took us past Geneva and through the beautiful Swiss-French national park of Jura into Burgundy, where we would stick around for a week or so. It was here in the Burgundian town of Beaune that I was meeting my family for a big reunion and birthday, but the BMW still had plenty to do. Perfectly suited for picking up relatives off the train from Paris, or naturally a trip to Dijon's version of the Homemaker Centre. The decision to go with a big wagon and not, say, an M2 seemed like the smart one. Beaune is a true hub village of the French winemaking profession, and the just harvested vines on the hillside outside town make for about the most ideal car review backdrop you can think of. Plus, this would hardly be a chasing cars piece without giving you my detailed assessment of the vehicle. Some of you will be interested, and here's the piece I filmed on location on a beautiful hillside in Burgundy.
So now we're at the other end of the trip here in the beautiful Burgundy region of eastern France. What has the 5 Series Touring been like? Well, this car has been pretty brilliant, but it's been brilliant in ways that we wouldn't usually expect a BMW to excel. I mean, the new 5 Series wagon, just like the sedan, which I've driven at some length back in Australia, is certainly less about an overt sporting persona. And this new shape 5 Series is really about being a super long-legged, super comfortable cruiser that's fantastic to do long distance in. I've certainly done quite a bit of distance in the Atlas Cedar Brown 530i Touring, which is a model that we're going to be receiving back home very, very soon. A great way to get to know a car is to jump into something unfamiliar like this and do 2,000 or 3,000 kilometers, because that way you really work out if it's comfortable, if it's livable every day, are the functions in the right place, does it have adequate performance on the highway and in town, and on all of those metrics the 5 Series Touring really stands up. However, it does face some fierce competition, as I alluded to back in Munich, mainly from luxury SUVs. Luxury wagons are usually more expensive, and they often don't include as many features as standard. What they give you instead, though, is much more of a luxury car feel. They feel more like the real deal, whereas the SUVs have a danger of feeling a little bit like just a facsimile of the non-SUV, of the passenger cars that the brand makes. And I think that that's quite true of the new 5 Series compared to an X5 or compared to other luxury SUVs from other German manufacturers. And this 5 Series is made on the production line in Munich rather than in the US, like the SUVs. And inside, it really does feel at the cutting edge of BMW's abilities in technology and luxury. So for that reason alone, I think that the 530i is worth consideration and is probably worth spending more over a similarly equipped and similarly performing X5 SUV. That said, the wagon body, it's not going to be for everybody, but it's certainly for me. And I mean, for Europeans, you look around and you see very few SUVs, you see plenty of station wagons. So this body really does still have some real appeal to it. And among that group of committed 5 Series Touring buyers are some people who just think wagons are cool, but most of them really want extra practicality from their 5 Series without the need to step up into a larger and more cumbersome SUV. And they'll be pleased that the practicality on the new 5 Series Touring has taken another step forward. And it's all about the boot, which firstly is nice and big. At 570 litres, You get 40 more litres than in the 5 Series sedan, but of course that doesn't tell the whole story because a wagon's boot is just such a better shape that makes it way more practical than the equivalent sedan because of how easy it is to put things in or out of this car. And that's particularly true for the new 5 Series Touring, which starts with a really low lip here, so it's really easy to slide things in or out. It's protected with an aluminium sill here, which means that the actual bodywork of the car won't be scraped by heavy suitcases by people who overpack, like me, as you put them in and out of the car. Of course, there's a plethora of other features here, including adjustable tie-down points on the boot floor, a hidden storage compartment underneath, remote releases for the back seats, which fold down in a 40-20-40 split, which is fantastic. It means that you can keep a 4-seat arrangement in the car while putting long and bulky items through the middle. And of course, there's electrical sockets here in the back and a selection of coat hooks and shopping bag hooks here, which mean that your fragile items won't slide around. There's also easy access to drop the tailgate, including a dedicated button to close it, and as you walk away from the car, it'll automatically lock with one touch. That practicality also shines through here in the back. Firstly, the doors open super wide, which is great if you need to fit a child's seat. But your passengers back here, whether they're children or adults, will feel extremely well looked after. Even a 6-footer back here like me just feels completely enveloped by space. In terms of legroom, there's heaps. My toes have plenty of room to move around, even with the driver's seat on its lowest setting. And I've got acres of headroom, although this car does not have a sunroof option. Europeans don't seem to like them as much as we do back in Australia. But it's here in the front seat where the 5 Series does most of its pampering. And it's also here behind the steering wheel where the 5 Series Touring feels least like a wagon in most ways, but I'll expand a bit more on that when we take it for a drive. Now, the cabin philosophy of the 5 Series is not about outright visual wow factor, like this car's main rival, the Mercedes-Benz E-Class, but instead what you get here is understated elegance, and you also get this incredible perception of quality. There's quality and expense in absolutely everything that you touch and look at in the BMW 5 Series, and I think that the perception of quality is quite a bit higher than in the E-Class. Every surface feels lovingly put together, from the faux leather but very beautifully stitched dashboard to the soft panels down here where your leg comes to rest, to the absolutely creamy leather steering wheel, which even has a leather hub in front of you, to the incredibly high-end ceramic controls, which are a very reasonably priced option in this car. And of course, the seats, although I'll come to the seats in a second. Now, this particular car is trimmed in an all-black layout inside, so it's got black leather and black piano black trim, and it looks classy and high-end. However, BMW offer you so many ways to customize this car a little bit more through different colored leathers and lots of very lush wood trim options. And I think there are better ways to do it than all black. But that said, it is classy, it's high-end, and it's classic. Now, the seats. The seats in this car are the optional for the European market comfort seats. Now, there are 5 Series trims back home which have the comfort seats as standard, the luxury line, and it's really something that you ought to go for. You can change everything from the leg extender, which is a classic BMW trait, to the tightness of the bolsters, to the angle of the upper seat back, and even the wings on the headrest. It's an incredibly sumptuous experience, and me and my traveling companion have just been unbelievably comfortable on this trip because of these seats. The technology proposition is also really impressive in this car. You get a standard 10.25-inch touchscreen up here, located where it should be, nice and high on the dash. I think that this tablet-style screen in the BMWs is more attractive than what you get in the Mercedes. It just looks better integrated to me. You also get digital dials on most 5 Series trims back home, but the digital dials are really underutilized. You can't put the map right in front of you, unfortunately. But there is an excellent heads-up display, which is much bigger and much more colorful than what you got on the last 5 Series. You can also choose a couple of different stereos. This car has the standard Harman Kardon stereo. It's powerful, it's punchy, there's plenty of speakers, and it sounds good on the go. But an incredibly lush option is the Bowers & Wilkins optional stereo, which is incredibly powerful and I think worthwhile if you can spare the cash. And as I said a moment ago, it's when you do several thousand Ks in a car over a short distance that you really pick apart the ergonomics. And the ergonomics in the new 5 Series are great. I mean, the controls fall to hand nicely. I do wish the steering wheel would go a little bit lower. However, by pushing it in a bit further, it mostly alleviates that problem. The technology controls also fall well to hand. But it's interesting driving a left-hand drive version of the car because you see the little conveniences that come up in left-hand drive markets. Like the fact that the indicator stalk is not next to the gear stick in European cars over here in Europe. Back home, you have to indicate and change gears if it's a manual or operate the technology controls all with your left hand. But here in Europe, your left hand does the indicators, your right hand does all the controls down here. Now that's of course a quirk of right-hand drive rather than anything in particular about BMWs, but just something fun and interesting to note.
And of course, we can't forget the dynamics of the 5 Series wagon. Key to this vehicle is that BMW gave us a luxury line, not an M Sport. That meant that this was a soft, comfy, refined cruiser rather than a vehicle with any real sporting pretension, and that's the way it should be with this kind of car. Sure, you've got Audi RS6s out there that do the fast wagon thing with aplomb, but there is nothing wrong with a more softly sprung, comfortable family car that rides on modest 18-inch wheels and simply cossets its occupants. That's what you get in a 5 Series Touring with the luxury line package. As for what's under the bonnet, this was a 530i, which these days means a 2-litre turbo 4 petrol, producing 185 kilowatts of power and 350 newton meters of torque. Sufficient, but not earth-moving, and it's a shame the Australian range won't include the superb 530d, a twin-turbo diesel 6 with a staggering 620 newton meters of torque. Instead, it's a choice between this thirsty-ish petrol and a frugal but quite modest diesel 4 in the 520d. Still, if it were my money, I'd purchase the 530i, as it's so refined that you barely hear the engine tick over and there's more than enough performance on offer. The standard suite of advanced safety technology on the 5 Series worked best here in Europe, where the traffic sign recognition, active cruise and lane keep assist all feel most ready to work, because the roads are so much better. But BMW's safety software is effective and helpful back in Australia too. 3,000 kilometres is plenty of time to become acquainted with a car, to know its ins and outs, to know whether it's worth over $110,000 as this vehicle is. You'll remember my question at the outset was whether the humble station wagon still does everything better than an SUV. Ride height and off-roading aside, which few people really need, the answer is a resounding yes. For families needing room, comfort and a rapid cruiser, the 530i Touring, metallic brown optional, is about as good as it gets.